Welcome to Human School. I'm your host, Dr. Patil Armenian. After 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, and 2 years of fellowship, I thought I was done. I did my time, got my degrees, and now I was just gonna live life. Well, think again. Some of my greatest schooling has come after my formal education was complete, and it keeps on coming. Join me at Human School, where we can learn together. I'm an emergency physician and medical toxicologist working at a large teaching hospital in California. I'm also a mom, wife, sister, daughter, and friend. Whether you work in healthcare or not, you too lead a busy life. Together, let's work on how we can thrive in all of our real-world roles. On this podcast, we'll dig deep into what it means to constantly learn and evolve, to be human. Every other week, I'll share some of my personal stories, interview inspiring people, and offer tools to help you learn more about yourself. Being on the front lines in the ER, you learn a lot about life and death. And though my philosophies were born in a busy emergency room, they can apply to anyone trying to live a joyful life here on Earth. Please listen, share, and subscribe to this podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Instagram at Human School Podcast, and feel free to let me know what topics or guests you want to hear about. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review it. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Human School. Today, we're going to get into a bit of a story about really myself and then how it relates to some pretty famous people, Ann and Sasha Shulgin. Now, all I can really tell you is my history, my stories, with the hopes that it can inspire you or move you or teach you. And my whole life has been one of searching, pulling threads of interest to see where they will lead. I feel like I'm always trying to remember something I felt that I forgot a long time ago. This is a story of one part of that search. The part that I didn't realize I was searching for, but maybe found me. Today, I'm going to talk about how I met Sasha and Ann Shulgin, and not just their impact on me, but what they mean to society and humanity as a whole. They are the godfather and godmother of psychedelics. But I'd never heard of them until I was a medical toxicology fellow at UCSF. Now, that was well past my partying years, which were, by the way, short and not that intense. After all, I had 2 jobs and a full load of classes in college and started medical school when I was 20. All of that kept me pretty busy. So while others may have known about psychedelics and this history, I was clueless. Now, I'm going to get into it in a lot of detail, but just to lay the groundwork, Sasha Shulgin was a synthetic chemist and psychopharmacologist, most famous for being the first person to synthesize and then take MDMA in the United States. And I never really learned anything about that in my medical education. And I wasn't an MDMA super fan like others I knew. I went to a lot of raves when I was in college, and even though I had some of my most formative life experiences at the rave, interestingly, though, I never ate MDMA or ecstasy, as we used to call it back then. Why is that? I mean, I could have, I had plenty of opportunity, but it was mostly because I'm stubborn. So initially, the only people I knew in college who were going to raves told me that I could only go with them if I ate ecstasy. Everyone was doing it and they made it seem like it was a requirement, like go to rave, eat ecstasy. And if there's anything I don't like, it's a random rule that people are trying to impose on me. I just wanted to listen to the music, and literally because they tried to act like this was a rule, I never ate MDMA. At that point, I never ate it. And so I didn't go to any raves with them. I went with others instead, but I still didn't eat MDMA because I thought, why would anybody act like that had to happen? Which is really interesting because one of the interesting rules from Ann and Sasha from an old MDMA pamphlet in the early 80s actually say under no circumstances should any person be persuaded or pressured to take MDMA. And I just felt like, yeah, that's That's so true. I have never been one to really give in to peer pressure. So I was like, I'm not doing it just because you guys are acting like I should. So, anyway, after college, I went to medical school, which, as you could imagine, involved lots of studying. When I wasn't studying, I was painting or watching trash reality TV with my friends. And I am still a reality TV junkie. I spent the first year of med school painting a large canvas, a huge painting, which I still have, of the vision I saw during my one and only psychedelic experience until that point, which was a completely accidental one, where I basically ate too many marijuana brownies on an empty stomach on my way to a rave in the middle of the desert. It was actually the day I took the MCAT, which is the medical school admissions test. And it was mostly scary because I thought that I physically felt sick because of the test itself, because of the MCAT, and not because of all the brownies I'd eaten on an empty stomach, which was so ridiculous. Once the vomiting and paranoia subsided, I saw beautiful visions and felt I saw the meaning of life. And that one vision alone, along with, the painting of it, and more art, more creativity, helped me get through med school and then my emergency medicine residency. I mean, it's kind of strange to think that one thing that you remember can just keep you going for that long, but it really did. Unfortunately, by my third year of emergency medicine residency, it was getting harder and harder, and I was really just stuck in the monotonous hard work of it all. In addition, someone very senior to me told me that I had to pay less attention to my art and more to medicine if I was going to succeed. And my young, naive self listened. I now know that to be completely wrong, but I listened. I thought, oh, yeah, I should focus more on the doctor thing if I'm going to, get anywhere. I started my medical toxicology fellowship after my residency. And at that point, I wasn't doing any art, nothing creative, really just immersed in learning the science of it all. And there's a lot of science in toxicology. I had to relearn the biochemistry that I hated as an undergrad. But this time I actually loved it because I was using it in real life on real patients. I relearned organic chemistry, all these lab techniques. I mean, just everything that I probably never even learned in the first place or just didn't appreciate properly. But I had a lot of science I needed to learn if I was going to be a good toxicologist. At this point, most of the patients in whose care I was involved was through the poison control center and not at the bedside. So I would get calls on sick people in various hospitals in the Bay Area and at the San Francisco Poison Control Center. We would kind of field those calls, and I would give a lot of advice over the phone to doctors and nurses in hospitals. While I loved doing that and it's still fun, I was slowly losing the humanity of it all. I'm really a person who's best at the bedside, in person, talking to everyone involved. And my education had slowly become detached from people. Seeing one or two patients a day in the hospital wasn't enough for me. Now, don't get me wrong, I was still having a good time, but this is the general context of where I was at. So I'm at a super prestigious university, UCSF, trying to prove myself through scientific knowledge and working really hard. At the same time, I was starting to feel like, oh, I guess I'm really becoming the boring doctor I never really wanted to be. But fortunately, halfway through my first year of toxicology fellowship in January of 2010, I had a case that changed everything. Well, that's dramatic. It didn't immediately change everything, but it led me down a completely different path of understanding. Now, if you know me, you know I keep receipts. I actually have this really fun email chain that I'm going to walk you guys through. I don't delete emails. I got it all. So in January of 2010, we were working on a case. So, in short, we had a sick 17-month-old girl who had ingested her mom's Chinese herbal diet pills. And just so you guys know, it's super common for kids that age, really from age 1 to 3, to just get into things and eat them. This is common, super common. This is why we say keep everything locked up around kids, because age 1 to 3, they're exploring the worlds with their mouths and they're just putting everything in there. So this 17-month-old had accidentally eaten her mom's Chinese herbal diet pills, and she had 6 days straight of just agitation. She was really upset and her heart was racing. She would occasionally be shaky with these uncontrollable movements of her arms and legs, what we call choreoathetoid movements. And she was in the pediatric intensive care unit at our hospital, requiring around the clock medications to help calm her down. This is a class of medications known as benzodiazepines. So that would be like things similar to Ativan or Valium or Xanax. And we were just trying to keep her calm. She was slowly improving, but on day 6, she was still moving a lot and unable to walk on her own. And this was a 17-month-old who, prior to this, was walking just fine. This happened to be at our hospital. And so we were able to do some pretty high level testing, which we call high resolution liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. And what's really cool about that type of testing, and what really we were discovering at that time, this was 2010, we hadn't used that technique on a lot of real life patients, but we were figuring out that we could find things in patients' blood that we weren't really expecting. And that's really useful in toxicology because there's new compounds being developed all the time, new things that come out. And so it's really helpful. And then you also have rare compounds, things that have maybe been around for a while, but they're not really used. And so we don't see a lot of them. So in this case, what we had isolated from this little girl's blood were 3 compounds. One was a dihydroxyphenylpropanolamine, the other was N-methylmescaline, and the other was trimethoxyamphetamine. And specifically, it was 2,4,5-trimethoxyamphetamine. As the fellow investigating this case, I was trying to figure out, well, like, how long can we expect this girl to be sick? And we were really focusing in on the 2,4,5-trimethoxyamphetamine. That seemed to have a really big peak. And I couldn't find anything on that compound anywhere. I really was kind of at a loss. And then that day during rounds, which is when you discuss all the cases with your boss doctor, your attending physician, I was running the case past my boss, Dr. Kent Olson, who I actually interview in episode 10 of this podcast. And I was like, okay, we found some of these compounds. The only place where I could see any mention of this trimethoxyamphetamine and how it might act in humans is this book called PIHKAL, PIHKAL. Have you ever heard of it? It's in like one chapter. And how can I get this book? But there's really nothing in PubMed. I'm not finding anything good. So then after rounds, Kent sends me an email saying, you know what? I think we have a copy of PIHKAL somewhere. And it's written by this guy Shulgin. He's a retired chemist. He has worked with Neil Benowitz in the past. And see if Neil can get you in touch with Dr. Shulgin. And you can ask if he's aware of any of these compounds having a long duration of effects. He wrote in the email, he used to synthesize, then try all of these compounds out with a group of friends in the Bay Area. So I'm like, what are you talking about, Kent? Like, first off, what do you mean there's a person that we know that made these things and then tried them? And Neil Benowitz, our department chair, like, knows him? My mind was blown. I was like, who are you talking about? What do you mean there's a person that I could talk to? So then I emailed Neil Benowitz, who Dr. Benowitz, I interviewed him in episode 2 of this podcast. And we actually talked about, I think, this story really briefly on that episode. But I emailed Neil being like, can you get me in touch with Dr. Shulgin? So Neil writes back saying, oh, Dr. Shulgin, Sasha, works as a consultant for my lab. Here's his telephone number and his email address. And then he CCs me on an email to Sasha saying, Sasha, this is one of our medical toxicology fellows. She's investigating an interesting intoxication she would like to discuss with you. And so that's how it all began. I had no idea that there was an actual person that had invented something that I could talk to about the thing that they had invented. And so I emailed Dr. Shulgin and I gave him the gist of the case, what we had found, and so I said, ordinarily we wouldn't expect these to cause intoxication for 6 to 7 days, and I would love to know what you think and any information that I could also give you that might be useful. So the next day, I get an email back from Alexander Sasha Shulgin and his chief chemist, Paul Daly, which first off, I was like, I can't believe these people emailed me back. And so they write back, we share your concern about this infant. Generally, we would expect these effects to dissipate within about 4 to 30 hours. But of course, higher doses can lead to significant prolongation of effects, which may be what you're observing. And we wish you the best outcome with your case. And then so began a correspondence about cases. Every so often, I would get a case that was Shulgin compound related. And then, we would just share information back and forth. And so a few months later, I went out for my first meeting at Shulgin Farm, and it was pretty amazing because I got to go out and go to the land where all these compounds were created. What am I talking about here? What is Shulgin Farm? Who is Sasha Shulgin? So I'll give you a brief background. Alexander Sasha Shulgin was a pretty profound psychopharmacologist and chemist who worked in the field of basically making insecticides and pesticides. For example, he made mexicarbate, which was one of the first biodegradable pesticides. It's a carbamate pesticide for all you toxicology nerds out there. And so he made a lot of money for the company that he worked for. So then he was basically given permission to work on whatever he wanted to work on. Now, he was really interested in the mind and how it worked and how altered states work. And so he started doing a lot of research into compounds that he felt were similar to mescaline. Mescaline is a prototype phenethylamine compound, and although we don't classify the phenethylamines as classic psychedelics, they do have some similar properties to the classical psychedelics. Classical psychedelics being LSD, DMT, which is in ayahuasca, for example, and psilocybin mushrooms. Mescaline is the active ingredient in different cacti, including the peyote cactus, the San Pedro cactus, the Peruvian torch, the Bolivian torch. And so Sasha had been really interested in this compound at first. And then he started making new compounds that were similar to mescaline and was patenting those and publishing on them. His main contribution was making new compounds. By the end of his career, he'd made almost 200 new compounds in both the phenethylamine class and the tryptamine class. The tryptamine class being more of your classical hallucinogens or classical psychedelics, similar to that. So he was really focused on chemistry and making new compounds. And now I have not mentioned his wife, Ann, yet. Ann is so fascinating because she's as important a part of this story as Sasha is. They were really genuinely a team. While Sasha was the chemist making these new compounds in his lab, and so he's like kind of the scientific side of things, Anne said she was the psychological and spiritual side of things. Anne did work as a therapist in doing therapy assisted by psychedelics for a few years. And then she transitioned mostly into the research and writing part of things. If you want to read an amazing piece of literature that, I think everybody needs to read, but then again, I'm fully biased. I would highly recommend reading PCOL and TCOL. So PCOL is the acronym for phenethylamines I have known and loved, and TCOL is the acronym for tryptamines I have known and loved. These two volumes were written by both Ann and Sasha together, and they're such a fun and fascinating read. So when I got the first case, I immediately bought the books. But I was really focused on the second half of each book. So the second half of PCAL and TCAL are basically part cookbook, part experiential reports, part pharmacology. So it's kind of the science side of things of this is the compound, for example, this is how it's made, this is how it acted, these are what people reported taking them at different doses, this is how long we think it's going to last, kind of all the nitty gritty. And for years, actually, those were the only parts of the books that I read. Actually, I think it wasn't until the pandemic really hit when I started reading again, because I went through a real dry spell with books. I started reading again that I went back and I read the first half. And let me tell you, the first half of PCAL and TCAL are where it's at, because those were the narrative chapters written by Ann and Sasha about their lives, their experiences, how all this even happened. And they're written as kind of more novel form. They use different names, but it's a fairly accurate, I think, true account of their lives and about how they had a group of 10 to 12 friends that would come over to their house and try out different compounds and report on their experiences of them. This is where I think the Shulgin farm family really came to life in these experiments. Sasha was famous for saying there is no casual experiment, and there really wasn't. They had a lot of what they would call experiments at the farm, which was Sasha's multi-acre family compound that had been in his family since before he was born. On this land was the home that they lived in, but also his lab. The lab is everything he would want and more. It's just an adorable lab where he kind of created so many different compounds and was host to many different experiments. So he lived and worked on his home property, and really where he was born and raised. Just to go back, I started visiting them semi frequently and was focused on the chemistry and understanding the science from Sasha. Then also had really lovely conversations with Anne and with their caretaker and assistant, Tanya Manning, their chief chemist, Paul Daly. And so it was really so nice to have this group that I could go and chat with about the topics that I really didn't have anybody else to talk to about. And that being, all these compounds that they had made about psychedelics, different psychedelic cacti on the property, what it meant, kind of all of it. And I even got to a point where sometimes people would send Sasha compounds that they had made, but he didn't really have good analytic capabilities in his lab anymore. I would take them to our lab at UCSF, analyze them, and then call them and tell them what were in the capsules that they had received. I mean, kind of sounds nerdy, but it was pretty fun to help out in that way. And then even through the Shulgin family, got to speak at a camp at Burning Man about the Shulgin legacy and did a really great Q&A with the audience for I feel like an hour and a half or 2 hours about drugs in general. And yet, despite all this, I was really naive. I didn't even understand the legendary status of the Shulgins because I was still seeing things as a toxicologist, an ER doctor, really firmly entrenched in the quote unquote normal parts of medicine. It was somewhat through me and partly because of the colleagues I was working with to analyze compounds in the lab that everything was framed through the lens of critical care toxicology, which is the care of the really sick, poisoned patients, usually accidental overdoses when it came to the Shulgin compounds. Some of it was in the excitement of finding new compounds that hadn't been detected in people before, but really, what was the point of that? I wasn't paying attention at all to why people would take these psychedelics and what psychedelics truly are and could mean for people. So the lessons for me came really slowly. First, I saw a chemist in Sasha who actually invented things. And so that led me to two huge lessons that I kind of forgot. Sometimes you forget things when you're so entrenched, but the first lesson being that science is people. Like people do science and move the needle forward. And I had just forgotten that there's people behind the things you learn about in textbooks and journal articles and all those things. The second lesson being that science is creativity. For Sasha, being in his lab synthesizing new compounds was an absolutely creative outlet. This is how new discoveries happen. This was like a purely creative endeavor. And when people would ask me, even at that time, of like, I don't understand this chemist, what does he do? I'd be like, think he's just trying to understand how our brain works. He's trying to map the brain, map the conscious and the unconscious. Like he's trying to figure it all out. And what else would you want to do but to try to figure it all out? These things seem so obvious, right? But I'd forgotten it. And it's a lesson that I would have to remind myself of over and over again in future years. Every time I got too caught up in work or shifts, burning out, all the things, like, don't forget there is creativity in this, and there are people behind movements. I have always seen myself split down the middle between science and art, between analytical and emotional, between objective and spiritual. You kind of get the gist. Like, I've always felt very half half. But on this path and at that time, I was really locked into the science side of things. So at first, I was really focused on the chemistry, talking to Sasha and Paul about chemistry, new compounds, how to help them archive their old compounds. And I am not even a chemist, but I felt like this is all I can contribute because what did I know about psychedelics? Barely anything. If you're in medical education now, either in med school or residency or fellowship, and are learning about psychedelics, consider yourself lucky. You get to learn about a topic that has been a part of humanity for millennia, but without the taboos that existed even just 15 years, even just 10 years ago. I'll say even 5 years ago, I would not talk about this topic. And this is why it's so important to talk about Ann and Sasha Shulgin, because in my opinion, the history of modern psychedelics in the United States begins with them. It begins with Ann and Sasha Shulgin. And, we talked in my last episode pretty extensively about indigenous use of psychedelics, and that's the original, right? But if we think about modern American history and who has moved the needle forward, it is Ann and Sasha Shulgin. And so here was this lovely, kind, unassuming couple that I would sit with and had lunch with and pie and bring them like dessert and chatting with like normal. Really, I mean, I hate to say it, not realizing who they were and how much they had contributed and were still contributing to the world. And the people around them were so welcoming. This was one of the things that I didn't realize at the time how important it was, but it really kept me going during fellowship. Just talking to them, being able to go back to the lab and analyze things, coming back to them, it really kind of gave me this purpose and kept me going. I think I've talked about the chemistry part somewhat, but right now, the way that psychedelics are being primarily framed in the cultural lexicon is in this use with therapy. It may seem like, well, where did this come from? Where did this whole psychedelic assisted therapy thing come from? But aside from the very, strong cultural indigenous traditions where this was a way for them to kind of process and deal with issues that they were having, whether physical, emotional, spiritual. But in this modern lexicon of therapy, it really started with the Shulgins. Sasha Shulgin was the person that introduced Leo Zeff to MDMA. And this was before MDMA was made a Schedule 1 substance. Leo Zeff, who is famous for being one of the true pioneers and teachers of psychedelic assisted therapy, would, get his MDMA from Sasha and then would go on and do individual and group therapy sessions. If you want a really good read and a good summary of his techniques of how he did psychedelic assisted therapy, I really recommend reading either The Secret Chief or The Secret Chief Revealed. It's basically the same book but with different introductions. This is where Leo Zeff gets into his protocols. And if you look at how the protocols were done, I mean, MDMA was meant to be used as a therapeutic agent, like a guide, like its own guide with a therapist in the room. This is the same concept that we are now hearing about in all of the different studies that are happening. A lot of the psychedelic studies that are ongoing right now have been published or are ongoing, going to be published, all involve psychotherapy along with use of the psychedelic substance. And this is where it all comes from. And so while Sasha introduced Leo to this, who then taught others as well as led his own groups for several years, Anne also did that and did several, sessions with people and helped to kind of fine tune how it should be done. There's a really great pamphlet that have been attributed to Ann and Sasha in the early 80s about proper usage of MDMA. It's available on Arrowid, one of my favorite websites, but that in and of itself really describes how they thought MDMA should be taken, what doses, and in this pamphlet, they say a lot of crucial things, which is just the layout of how an MDMA session should be done. They recommended it should always be done with someone else, preferably a therapist, and that you should always have a doctor on call who's knowledgeable about these compounds so that if anything goes wrong, they can help you. But also, they were very accurate in their dosing, that you have to know specific amounts, specific doses, and that every person has their own best dose. And then about how to redose, let's say halfway through a session. It was all done in a really logical, scientific way. So this usage of MDMA was pre-MDMA becoming, I would say, a street drug or a club drug. That also has some good usages, but the problem is that it's unregulated. And so if somebody takes too much of it by accident, they could actually get sick from it. Those amounts that make people sick that I have published on, they're not the amounts that are used in these therapy sessions. They are 4 to 5 times more, so way more than what would be used in one of these sessions. So it's really interesting that Anne worked for 3 years as a lay therapist. She did hypnotherapy with MDMA, sometimes with other compounds. I know she really also had a preference for 2CB, but she really felt, and this is a quote from her, that euphoria is good for you, and these are tools for spiritual growth. It was a real problem when MDMA was then put in Schedule 1 permanently in 1986, because that, in essence, stopped all research and really publication. For example, Leo Zeff's name was not known until several years after his death because he didn't want to publish anything or get his name out for fear of literally like being arrested and going to jail for doing this. Even to this day, I mean, it is still Schedule 1. So that's why it's only done in the highly controlled study settings. Now, Sasha didn't just resurrect MDMA, but he created a lot of different compounds. So the entire 2C series, so 2CB being a really popular one, several different tryptamines, so many different compounds. You can look them up in his books. But he was like an inventor of compounds. And him and Anne really worked together as a team to do these things and to get these ideas out. As you could imagine, in the beginning, the DEA was fine with Sasha and his work. But once the PCOL and TCOL books came out, which were basically cookbooks, as I said, the DEA, once they got wind of it, about 4 years after publication of the first one, they were not happy. The DEA came and cracked down on his lab and his production. That really put a halt to a lot of the novel synthetic compound production. But what was really great about Sasha and Anne was that they had a strong community and they had a huge community that kept going. And this was something that I was not expecting to learn from them, but I really learned this huge lesson was that people need community and work better in community and a diverse community. When I'm working a lot, I fantasize about being alone to read and write and work on the things I want to work on. And always by the third day, I start to feel depressed. I don't know why. And it's because I actually need the energy of others around me. I think a lot of people do. And I know that I'm not meant to work alone, no matter what I tell you guys when I'm overworked. Don't believe me. This was something that was so beautiful about Anne and Sasha because, first off, they had a huge group of the family that was around. And every Easter and July 4, they would have a big potluck party, inviting everyone in the family. And they did their major research work in teams. Again, like I said, with 10 to 12, testing all the new compounds at different doses and reporting on their effects. And even so, they were really strong advocates of intentional psychedelic use, not simply recreational, and publishing advice on how to use them, ideally in a group setting or at least with a single client and therapist. But all of these different layers show you don't need to be alone. You don't have to do this work alone. When I would think about a chemist before, I would think of just somebody in their lab by themselves, doing something. They showed me that no, that doesn't have to be the case at all. You can do this type of really highly technical work in community to benefit your community. Recently I went back to the farm for the first time since Anne passed away. The last time I was there, it was just past peak pandemic. It was the summer of 2021. So we social distanced. We all sat outside. Anne already, wasn't feeling well. She'd been sick a lot. It was kind of quiet. So it was like a real quiet visit. And then when I was there a few weeks ago, the place was humming with activity. As I parked, I saw many unfamiliar faces that were there for a wonderful event, but I was fresh off of a 3-hour drive to get there. And so I needed to decompress. So I ran down to the lab. Paul was there cleaning up a little. So I just started cleaning cobwebs off everything. And I spent 45 minutes in the lab cleaning cobwebs. And I just felt like that was where I needed to be at the time. And then once the jitters from my drive wore off, I was ready to talk to people. Then I just got to go up and be a part of this amazing community event that brought so many people together. And it was really like a joyous event. And it was just so nice because I felt like they're gone, but the legacy that they have created is still here. And it's still a part of this community. And there's still so many lessons that we need to learn from them. Over the years, I've done more and more, I would say, work in the psychedelic research space, mostly in the teaching sector. And I just really feel so lucky that I got to meet these wonderful humans and the amazing people around them to help me realize that science is not this solo thing locked away in some hospital or lab somewhere, but science is part of people, it's part of community. And you could make a huge difference with just a couple people. I mean, just Ann and Sasha Shulgin, their effect reverberates out so much. And so nothing in the current psychedelic space I feel would be happening if it wasn't for them. And this is a huge part of our, not just American history, but world history when it comes to this topic, and has helped so many people. And I think will continue to in the future. So I'm just lucky that although they're gone, that place still exists. And so I think I'll end it there. If you guys want me to talk more about these topics, please let me know. And although I don't have any affiliations with anyone, but I would highly recommend visiting the shulginfarm.org website. They also have a great Instagram that you could follow that always has, all whatever activities are happening. It's really wonderful to know that such an important part of our American history is based here in California. And again, let me know what other topics you want me to talk about in this field or other fields. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Please like, subscribe, share, and download the podcast. And again, you can find us at Human School Podcast on Instagram. I'd like to thank Dr. Zac Efron for the theme music. And I'd just like to make a general disclaimer that any of the institutions I work for, including Community Regional Medical Center, UCSF, UCSF Fresno, and American Ambulance, have nothing to do with any of my thoughts or opinions, and so we'll kindly leave them out of this. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.